More and more companies are turning to data to make key business decisions. So the demand for data scientists is growing not just in India but around the globe. But do you have what it takes to land a data science job abroad? Find out in the Scaler Masterclass on landing a data science job abroad. The session will be taken by an industry expert with over 13 years of experience who will guide you on what skills you'll need to land a job abroad. Find out what you need to add to your resume, how you can prepare for interviews, and what kind of roles suit you best, all in under 3 hours. Register now on the link below.
The elements vertically. Now we continue with the to-do text. First, it will have a padding of 15 pixels. It's important to note that we previously set a padding to 0 for the to-do. That means that now the to-do text can determine the height of the entire to-do. We want this to-do text box to fill out the entire to-do item, so that our clickable area is as large as possible. Therefore, we have to set padding right to 0 and, very important, flex grow to 1. Flex grow ensures that this element takes up as much width as possible within its parent element. As to-do uses display flex, all 4 child elements, including the text, will be affected. By giving only the to-do text a flex grow, it will occupy all the available space while the other elements are pushed to the edges. This ensures that the delete button is always at the far right of the to-do item, regardless of the length of the to-do text. If we don't use flex grow, the delete button would be placed at the end of the text, and this will be different every time. So, flex grow pushes the other elements to the edge. At the same time, we have maximized the clickable area of the text. Even if we click here, the checkbox will be activated. Now let's style the delete button. We only want the trash can icon to be visible. Padding is 3 pixels, background none, border none, and use flexbox to center the icon both horizontally and vertically. Now we don't see the button anymore and only see the icon. We'll also change the cursor to pointer. Next, let's change the color of the trash can icons. For this, we have to go back to our HTML file. Here, at our SVG elements, we need to use the fill attributes. The color of the trash can icons is our secondary color. We do this for both delete icons. Back to the CSS code. When hovering over the delete button, we want to change the color of the SVG to red. So we are going to use the fill property again, but this time in CSS. Here we apply a red color. Additionally, we'll add a slight transition of 200 milliseconds ease to the SVG element to make the color change smoother. Now let's style the custom checkbox. Currently, it's just a label with a checkbox icon. Using these CSS settings, we can turn it into a green circle. We are using min height and min width to ensure that the circle is not squished. And flex shrink is set to 0 to prevent it from being squeezed by other flexbox elements. We want to maintain the circular shape of the checkbox. We also want to hide the check mark in the checkbox when it's not filled out. To do this, we'll go back to the HTML and set the fill attribute of the checkmark icon to transparent. Again, we do this for both icons. Now we can see the checkmark disappear. Now onto the exciting part. We want to change the appearance of the custom checkbox depending on whether the actual checkbox is checked or not. For this, we first need to select the actual checkbox using the input with the type checkbox. If this one is checked, this is a pseudo class, then we use the sibling selector to select our custom checkbox next to it. And now we can style it however we want. For example, we'll set the background color to accent color to fill out the checkbox. When we test this in the browser, we can see that our custom checkbox is always being activated or deactivated depending on the actual checkbox. They are always in sync, just as we want it. Now let's make the checkmark visible again. We select our actual checkbox with the attribute selector, and if this one is checked, we select the custom checkbox with the sibling selector. Basically, it's the same thing again. But now, inside this element, we need the SVG icon. Here, we set the fill property to primary color. And with that, we have finished styling our checkbox. Additionally, I want to strike through the to-do text when the checkbox is checked. So, similar to before, when the checkbox is checked, we select the to-do text with the sibling selector. And here I will set text decoration to line through. Also, the color is secondary color. Now in the browser, it will actually look like our to-do is completed. Now we just need to hide the actual checkbox. So we select the checkbox again and set display to none. The checkbox is now hidden in CSS, but in HTML it is still there. This means we can still use its activation state, whether it's checked or not. So it still works for our custom checkbox, but the actual checkbox is no longer visible to the user. That's how we want it. As a final touch, let's add some transitions to make everything smoother. The checkbox gets a transition and cursor pointer. This ensures a smoother color change. The to-do text also gets a transition so that the graying out effect is smoother. Now let's make this website responsive. We want to adjust some settings for mobile devices, such as moving the add button below the input field, because we simply don't have enough space on smartphones. For this, we'll use a CSS media query that has a max width of 500 pixels. This CSS code will only apply to devices that are smaller than 500 pixels, which is the case for smartphones. Firstly, I'll set the standard font size to 12 pt in the HTML tag. For the add button, we will undo position absolute by setting position to unset. The width will be 100%, margin top 10 pixels, padding 15 pixels, and height auto. With these settings, the button should now be below the input field. We also make some adjustments to the H1 heading. Margin top will be reduced to 50 pixels because it doesn't need to be as large anymore. And the font size will be 15 viewport width. Viewport width is a unit that refers to the display width. Therefore, the font size will be smaller on smaller devices and larger on larger devices. The CSS part is now completed. So let's start with the JavaScript part. To do so, we create a new file in our project folder. We name it app.js. Let's include this file in our HTML head using the script tag, and pass the file name app.js to the source attribute. Additionally, we set the defer attribute. This way, the JavaScript code will only be executed once the HTML page has finished loading. In app.js, we first create an alert to test if JavaScript is being executed successfully. As we can see, everything is working. Before we start coding in JavaScript, we should first think about what features do we want to implement. We want to add new to-dos using this text field, delete a to-do by clicking on the trash can icon, save the to-do in local storage so that it stays the same even after leaving the page, and also save the status of a to-do if it is completed. When reloading the page, it should be checked off. To implement these features, first we need to access the various HTML elements in JavaScript. We need this form element and the input field. We also need the UL with the ID to-do list. Later, we want to insert our to-dos here with JavaScript. That means for now we can comment out these to-do list items. Later we're going to need them. In app.js, we now create the connection between HTML and JavaScript. We create the variable to-do form and get the form element using the query selector. For the input field, we use document.getElementById. We use the same for the UL with the ID to-do list. Make sure you provide the correct IDs in the parentheses. Then we create an array all to-dos. Here we want to add the to-dos later. When we enter text in this input field and press enter or hit the button, then a to-do should be added to the all to-dos array. Since both elements are in the to-do form, we can simply give the form an event listener. When submitting the form, the event listener should be executed. So we add submit as the event type. Then we pass a callback function. It has a parameter e. In this function, we first create an alert to see if the event listener is working. Now, when we go to the text field and press enter, the form is submitted and the event listener is executed. Clicking the button can also trigger the event listener, so this works perfectly. However, after submitting the form, the page reloads automatically. We don't want that. To prevent this, call the method event.preventDefault. In this case, E is the event object. This object holds very useful functions. You can read more about this in the documentation. This function, preventDefault, prevents the default behavior. So, this prevents the page from reloading. Now we can add the to-dos to the array. It's best to create a separate function for this, add to-do. In this function, we want to read the text from the input field, and then we want to add the text to the array all to-dos. So we create a variable to-do text and assign the value from the to-do input. We can output the to-do text using an alert. Then, when we enter something in the input field, we should see the text that we entered. Now it's also a good practice to trim the user input. In other words, removing any unwanted spaces on the left and right. Next, we add our to-do to the all to-dos array. To do so, we call the push method and pass the to-do text. We can output the array to the console to see if it is working. Now, when we submit a to-do, it is added to the array. To prevent the user from submitting an empty to-do, you could also add an if condition here. If the to-do text.length is greater than 0, then the to-do should be added. And the text should be cleared, so we set the value to an empty string. This code will only be executed if the user actually enters text. If no text is added, nothing happens. Our array is now filled with to-dos. However, to make the change visible on the page, we need to write another function that changes the actual HTML code. Create to-do item. It takes the to-do text as a parameter. In the function, we create the to-do list item. To create an HTML element, we can use the function createElement. We pass li as an argument because we want to create a list item. Next, we set the inner text to the to-do text from our parameter. Finally, we need to add the new to-do item to our UL. For this, we use the append function. Now, when we create new to-dos, we can see them displayed on the page. However, this is not the best approach, because here we don't use our array all to-dos. It would be better if we always display the current state of the array. So any changes to the array will result in a change of the to-do list. So every time the value inside this array change, we want to update our to-do list. For this, we write a new function, update to-do list. The first thing we do is to clear our unordered list, because we are going to completely recreate the to-do list with every change. So we set the inner HTML of the unordered list to an empty string. And now we can refill the to-do list with our to-dos from the array. For this, we use a for each loop to iterate over all the items of the array. We write all to-dos dot for each. Then we pass a callback function. It has two parameters, to-do and to-do index. If you don't know how for each loops work, here's a simple explanation. The for each method takes a function as its parameter. This function will be executed once for every element inside the array. The first parameter, to-do, represents the current to-do which is processed in the array, while the second parameter, to-do index, is the index, so basically the number of the current to-do element. I always recommend to read the documentation for more information. Here, in the for each loop, we create the to-do item using the function createToDoItem. To make this work, we need to give this function a return statement. We do this here instead of the append first parameter, so this function should return the to-do list item. So the createToDoItem function creates a to-do item and returns it. So we can now append the to-do item to our unordered list. To see this change, we have to call the function updateToDoList. We want to call this function every time the array changes. For example, here inside the if statement of the addToDo function, after we push the text to the array. Later, we will call the updateToDoList function in other places as well. Now it works just like before, but with the difference that now we can use the array to fill the to-do list. The to-do items still don't look good, so let's take care of that. We go to the function where we create the to-do item. Then we remove the lines where we set the inner text of the to-do item, and instead we set the inner HTML. Here we use these backticks. These are important because we want to use multiple template strings. For the inner HTML, we simply copy the content of an li from our HTML code. So finally, the HTML code becomes relevant.